So first, let me say thank you to being invited to Jane, to be able to come and join you. When I was reading more about legal services, I noted how much what I do has, and our company does, has in common in sort of shepherding access and giving access to people using technology in ways that some of the best companies offer. But for people who don't have that access, that's really important. We can do better. And so I'm really excited to be here. And so I'm going to share a little bit about how we do it at Trust, and hopefully some of the things will resonate with you. Let's see. We're going to make sure that we don't have any feedback. Okay, I think that works. Okay, if it doesn't, please let me know. The other thing I want to say is that one of the things that we talk about at Trust is that technology in many ways is a superpower. And one of the things about superpowers is that superpowers can be used for good and could be used for evil. That's what makes it a superpower. And one of the things that we have in common is that we're centered on good. You all are centered on access to justice. We're centered on creating better experiences for all people who are using software. So let me tell you a little bit about Trust and a little bit about how we might go about things that would be helpful for you. So a little bit, we were the Inc. 5000, as we said, Inc. 5000 the last 3 years. That means I'm really tired. Growing company is challenging. We got our start back in 2013, really, with working on healthcare.gov. We helped fix it. We were called in, and the quick story is that my co-founder got a call. Actually, he gave me a call at 7 p.m. on a Sunday. I was picking up Cheerios from my 5-year-old and so forth, and I get the call. Now, if you get a call from a colleague on a Sunday, unless it's a regular call, you know that call is what? Bad news. So I answered the call, and he said, the CTO of the United States wants us to go work on healthcare.gov. That wasn't what we were doing at the time. And I said, okay, you got to go. He says, yeah, I got to go. I said, when do you got to leave? Tuesday. That was Sunday. Okay, we got it. We'll figure it out. That was the start. It was a call to action to help solve a really complex problem. And we were able to be successful. They asked us back, and then we started working with US Transcom, and we worked with Center for Medicaid Services, and with the Berkeley Lab that's doing a lot of work with climate change data. Right now we're working with Space Force, which is really fun, a new department. And all of the things that this has in common is that these are highly regulated institutions, highly regulated industries. Our commercial clients have some of the same properties. And so the complexities that you all are experiencing when you're navigating through different agencies and statutes and so forth, some of which are local, some of which are national, yeah, that's familiar territory. That's what we do, solving complex problems, doing custom software. But this is who we are. We have been remote first since 2011. We're in 36 states, not as many states as you all are. And we're a highly diverse team. We've been salary transparent, as we said, but we have 50% she, her identifying people at Trust, and over 60% in leadership. 35% of our folks are BIPOC, MENA, Latinx, Black, Asian, South Pacific, and 25% LGBTQ+. Now, this is on purpose. We did this on purpose. We created, right in our inception, we wanted to have a diverse company because we thought it would be a stronger company. Not only the fact that I'm a black man, we have a white woman co-founder and a white male co-founder, so we're not going to pretend to be anything else. But as you'll see later, this actually has an important function with being able to deliver technology for all people. The other thing we are is values-driven. And, there's lots of places where you have, people are our most important asset or whatever. We really tried to make these values verbs. Be adaptable, for example. Act without fear, for example. How do we act into these values? And how do we express these through action for our clients? That's a little bit about trust. And it's a little bit about, when I say human-centered, where it kind of comes from. Now, this is a situation that I'm going to share with you that might be real familiar to some of you, but it really puts this at a point, what human-centered is all about. Let's see if this runs. Now, the sound doesn't matter. This is two men at the Facebook office. Yeah, that happens. It happens more than you might think. So, for those of you who are dark-skinned, this is not the first time you've seen this. On average, this probably happens to be about 30 to 40% of the time at offices and airports and so forth and so on. And the reality is, it's an annoyance, right? It's an annoyance. But imagine a little further. Imagine that sensor, because that sensor is not picking up dark skin, is the same kind of sensor that goes into an autonomous vehicle. It's the same thing. And while that sensor and that dispenser is blind to me as I put my hand under and try and wave it, no amount of hand waving is going to make that autonomous vehicle that doesn't have a driver see me. That's not an annoyance, that's fatal. That's what we're talking about. And I know you all have similar kinds of experiences dealing with systems that exclude or put people in danger. That's what we're talking about. That's why human-centered matters. So the thing is that product team probably didn't try and have this outcome. They probably didn't have the right people around the table. They may not have known to look for and test out on different kinds of people. That can happen. The thing is, we all have blind spots. Every single one of us. And the question is as a team, as a development team, can we reduce the number of blind spots that we have? Including multiple stakeholders becomes real important. Now you get why that diversity thing at the beginning was important. That's why looking around at people in the room, why the diversity in the room is important. So this skill is even more urgent when you put it at scale. Again, that library of code could be published, shared to open source, picked up by an autonomous vehicle company, and copied to millions of vehicles globally. And when a runaway truck happens across the globe, most of the people in the world are dark-skinned. We have lots of problems that could arise if we're not thinking in this way. Something I just read recently kind of puts more urgency into it. You know those oxygen meters that you measure your hands? Well, during COVID, those oxygen, the sensors were not able to pick up oxygen levels in dark skin. They overestimated the amount of oxygen present. And it's thought to be attributed to the spike in deaths at the early part of COVID because people that should have been hospitalized were not getting diagnosed properly because the sensor didn't read it. So that just got published about six months ago. It happens all the time. So these are the types of things that if that team maybe had been more inclusive or thought or tested it differently, there may have been people who were able to be saved. We in this room have far greater impact than we realize. And I'm sure no one here wants to be responsible for a tragedy. So The question is, how can you raise your hand? How can you raise your hand and say, hey, I'm not sure we've tested this on everybody? How can we figure out how to make sure that we don't have negative impacts unintentionally? It's a hard thing. And it's a hard thing for an individual in a moment to raise that hand, especially if maybe they're a junior person, but they recognize something that the senior person doesn't. That's hard. I'm hidden a little bit sometimes. So the question is, how do you create a system to enable more of that feedback? That's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. So we have taken an intentional approach to these kinds of problems. We develop systems. Now, you might think, oh, we need to innovate. We need to figure out a different kind of sensor, a better sensor. Yeah, you do. Actually, it's happened. There are 2 black women who are running autonomous vehicle companies, and one of them said, when I asked her the question, how are you dealing with the sensor problem? She said, I gave it to my engineers. I said, I have a 12-year-old daughter who's darker than I am. Your job is to make sure none of our trucks kill her. Go. And they went. And they're successful at it. They've been able to create an array to do that. So it's possible. But the innovation was not that it's a better sensor or more sophisticated sensors, it's just a different sensor. There's a mythos of innovation which is that big shiny object or the lone genius or the aha moment. And that's okay, but I think that's not sufficient because many of the innovations happen incrementally. Different initiatives by different people then come together to create a better experience. And so being an innovator is not enough, and it's hard. But you put it with an infrastructure. Now you can start to develop a system. And what I mean by infrastructure in this case is the interaction between processes, software, operations, and crucially, people. People are part of our infrastructure. Because ultimately, technology problems are people problems. Technology is a tool, right? It's a platform for all of our collective behaviors. So we have to include people if we're going to try and do these innovative things. So one of the things that infrastructure does is it creates a system. This system that enables you to repeat actions. Sort of like a checklist. A checklist is a piece of infrastructure that's incredibly effective, especially in hospitals. It enables you to share these innovations, to bring others into the room. So open source is a version of this in a technology frame. It enables you to scale it so that you can bring automation and automation to things that were formerly manual. And that enables you to scale it to larger amounts of people. And finally, to sustain effort. If there's one lesson out of the pandemic, is that heroism is not sustainable. We have been depleted, we are tired. And building systems and building infrastructure allows for less individual toil. So I'm sure people here in the room understand this. So let's think about how, and take a couple looks at how we think about this and maybe apply it to technology and justice. I'm going to talk about this at 3 levels. I've already started a little bit on human-centered development. Then I'm going to talk about systems and silos, and then I'm going to talk about purpose. And all of these things are designed to enable us to take our great thoughts, our changes, and our innovations and share them and scale them so that they're sustainable for ourselves and for our clients. So what is human-centered development? A lot of people have said human-centered design, and I say development because I want to be inclusive. And there's a lot of definitions. Here's a simple one for me. It's centering on the person. Not just the person who's using the software, but centering on the people that operate the software. Many of you in the room are operators of software on behalf of your clients, and you're bringing something very important to the room in terms of the knowledge of how to design that software system well. Centering on a person means you're centering not just on the individual and what they need and so forth, but that experience that they're having. What do they bring into the room? Cultural factors, English as a second language, maybe a hearing impairment, maybe trauma. All of these things can go into the bucket of human-centered development, but essentially it's asking them and asking people, how do we center on the human in this interaction? Not on our own convenience, not on what the requirements say, but on the human that's behind the system. This is why a diverse team matters. What I didn't say originally was this team consists of designers and researchers, application engineers, infrastructure engineers, product people, delivery people, client engagement. All these factors go into delivering something that's really effective and human-centered. They're also diverse in neurodiverse. There's introverts and extroverts. There's sight and hearing impaired folks. They see different things, and that's really, really good for human-centered development. One thing that blows people's minds is that a lot of people think of human-centered design and user development, oh, that's a designer's job. That's a person thinking about user experience. Well, we actually go to our clients and blow their minds by saying, infrastructure is a design problem. Because, so for example, if you design an incredibly smooth interface for one of your clients, but the data that gets generated from that interaction is different in Tennessee than it is in Michigan, then that system can't read that same interaction in the same way. An infrastructure person is like, yeah, I want to make sure that data is normalized. I want to make sure I can read that data. I can build that data. I can trust the data that's coming out of that interaction so I can deliver better service. So what we do, we bring the quote-unquote back-end folks and the front-end folks together in the room right away. And then start to convince people and persuade people that this is an approach that's going to be more human-centered than if we just said, let's do this one way and then kick all the data at the end. No one's ever had that happen to them, I'm sure. Now, how do we convince people? So I could talk a lot about tools and structures, and a lot of folks here have those tools and structures, so I'm not going to tell you a lot of things that you don't already know. I've included more in the book that we use at Trust, but there's lots and lots of resources out there. But this image, you remember how you felt when you saw this image and saw this video? This is one of the things that actually is the most persuasive. When you can record or demonstrate the impact of something either not working or something that is working, for us has been the most powerful thing that we can do. And then we build that into our systems. When we do development, a lot of folks are probably familiar with the idea of sprints for agile development. So every week or every 2 weeks, kind of planning out your work, figuring out what's changed, iterating, et cetera. Part of what's important for that is doing demos. Showing your work, showing something that works, showing the impact on a user can persuade people in ways that, again, my words cannot. I'll give you a quick example. And I wish I could show this, but I don't have permission. We're working on a large project with the DoD Transcom. And what they are concerned with and what we're helping them do is solve something that is the second most stressful thing after combat for service members. Anybody know? Any military folks? Moving. Because people move all the time. And you can imagine being a young person with a child whose spouse has been shipped to another part of the world, and you have to move, and you're there with a child. That's stressful enough. But then, not sure whether it's going to come. You spend 5 months going from agency to agency, having duplicate information, lots and lots of paperwork. So they brought us in to help solve that. Now, the approach we took was another kind of thing that people probably know about, which is called a silver thread. So instead of attacking each of the areas where we had to map out 300 APIs from all the different moving companies and trucking companies, et cetera, we said, okay, let's actually just make sure we can get one person from the start to this process all the way to the end. And when we're able to do that, then we can maybe figure out all the interactions that were wrong, and then maybe we could put 2 through them, and maybe we could put 10, maybe we could put 100. But incrementally thinking about how the human in that system is operating. Now, we got lots of resistance, a lot of resistance, because there's an uncertainty in what you're trying to do. We can't say, oh, these are the requirements, we're just going to do this and we're going to, but we found that that's not effective. So we insisted on interviewing the operators of the system, the people doing all this management, and then we took a film of a colonel who's one of the operators of the system. And the prototype he was using, he was doing it on a mobile phone, not on a computer, not visiting offices, no paper. And he's doing it, and 8 minutes later, he's done. He looks at it, he goes, is that it? And we said, yeah. He pushed the button, it was done. We showed that to the leadership, and that advanced the ball by 100 times. It's a demo. It's a simple human-centered development process, but showing your work, as many of us have experienced, showing your work can be even more powerful than telling people about your work. As we said, healthcare.gov was one of the first projects we worked on. This is a logo from the war room, where my colleague was sitting for months and months and months trying to solve healthcare.gov. There's one prime contractor to deliver that, $200 million, 22 subcontractors, lots and lots of requirements, and there wasn't any requirement that said it had to work. I'm serious. There wasn't a requirement that said that someone should be able to go into the system, register, sign up, learn if they're eligible, push a button, and then get the confirmation that they are eligible. So, as a result, every of these 22 companies did what they were told to do. Requirements. Every single one of them would say, we met our requirements. But there wasn't a through line. So people were optimizing for their own problem, which brings me to the second principle, to solve the problem of the classic silo. Now, I'll spare you the longer explanation, although I think it's fascinating. What a lot of the problem was is that healthcare.gov, the original folks working on healthcare.gov, thought we had a complicated problem. And that means it's, generally speaking, linear, well understood. So all the interactions between all the pieces are well understood. You don't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, it's a complex problem. Complex problems have interaction effects. So you can have the same amount of elements, but when you put a new element in or change something about it, the system changes. That makes a big difference because what happens is you now increase those blind spots I was talking about earlier, and something that you solve locally might crash something else. And so the job of the healthcare.gov folks at the beginning was to find out if we change something, where's the crash going to be? And that took months, but they were able to figure it out and then put up something that was usable. So the question is, like, how do we go about doing this? I gave you a little example because all the blind spots we have, you're in a system. It's not just your blind spot, it's a whole bunch of blind spots. So I'm going to I'll give you a little analogy, one of my favorite ones. Okay, this is not going to be a typical butterfly transformation story, I promise. This is a story about the imaginal cells. Imaginal cells are these really fascinating cells within a caterpillar. They're like little architects. They have all the blueprints for a butterfly encoded in the cell itself. But while a caterpillar is munching away, it doesn't really matter. And in fact, they're antigens to the caterpillar because they're not part of what's going to enable the caterpillar to grow. And so the imaginal cells have to figure out how to connect. They're programmed to connect with each other. When they are able to connect, when sufficient numbers of them connect, that's what triggers the transformation, and that's what makes the caterpillar go up into a chrysalis and literally turn itself into a goo of proteins. That's it. But the imaginal cells are still intact. As I said, they have the blueprints. So they take that goo and start reassembling it and start doing things that form wings and form antenna and form legs. And that's when you get your butterfly. This is a picture of those. So out of the goo, it comes out of this butterfly. And the thing is that the imaginal cells are programmed to connect with each other, programmed to communicate. Silos, on the other hand, are optimizing just for their own needs. And by the way, it's not necessarily their fault. They may have been told exactly what to do. This is a thing. But how do we then bridge those gaps between the silos and act more like imaginal cells? The thing that imaginal cells do is act with a particular purpose, to make a butterfly. I told you about now this might sound like a lot of issues. Wait a minute, I gotta optimize my own thing, I gotta be human-centered. Where do I start? There's a lot of stuff here. This is from one of our designers' presentations because I just love this slide. The thing is, you can break these problems down. And you can break these problems down with a diverse team coming from different places. Figuring out which problem to solve, which has the most impact, is a process that we use all the time. And I could go through the tools. I won't go into the tools today. But there's lots and lots of resources around this. But the real important thing I want to leave you with is that it's being able to connect and understand that you're part of a larger system. And being able to optimize not just for your part, but optimize for the entire purpose, for the entire interaction, whether you use a silver thread or some other process, is the key piece. One quick story. I was talking to a woman named Martina Nitze, who was another person on the healthcare.gov team. She wrote a great book called Hack Your Bureaucracy. I definitely recommend it. And she was talking about, she went to an agency, can't name the agency, and had all these different interactions that were going on, and she's tracing them and trying to figure out something. And she finally got to this one woman who said, what else? She asked, why are there's carbon copies here? She rolls her eyes and says, yep, it's because I got to send these carbon copies to this department. And this department, there are a bunch of dinosaurs. They don't understand what they're doing. I wish we could just get rid of them. So, of course, she went to the department. And she mapped all the flows and all the information and so forth and so on. And then said, I heard that there's like information that comes in carbon copy. And she rolls her eyes and says, yes, we always get it from just this agency, and there are a bunch of dinosaurs, and, right? So you know what happens, right? So she basically had them have a conversation together, and neither of them wanted the carbon copy, but because they're optimizing for whatever constraints they had or some legacy system or whatever, they never had a conversation and say, we don't want this, but we don't want to send it. Let's figure out something new. It happens all the time. The key is that conversation, to just be aware, to have that conversation, to reach out across to the next department or the department is giving you information and have a conversation. What is it that you need? This is why interviewing operators of the systems become incredibly important. Now, I did a little bit of a hand wave. So I talked about the imaginal cells as being incredibly important, and that they are designed to achieve a larger purpose, create a butterfly. But I'm sure that we've all been in an experience where we've been on a team that's working at cross purposes, right? Where what I'm trying to do seems different than what you're trying to do, and different what they're trying to do. And we're all supposedly trying to do the same thing, but we never had a conversation about it. But we all feel that frustration. So the third thing I'm going to talk about in terms of an infrastructure for innovation, after thinking locally about human-centered design and thinking in terms of a system with imaginal cells, is purpose. How do you start with purpose? How do you get to that point? And how do you make purpose a practice? So I'll tell a personal story and how I developed this. because it's timely. It's the beginning of the year. And if any of you make New Year's resolutions, in about 3 weeks, 60% of you will have stopped. That's the rough stat. And it's because there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I got dissatisfied with that about 15 years ago, and I was like, I got to figure out something different. Because I just didn't like failing by mid-February, right? So I started to think about a different way of approaching this. And I read all the books about purpose and effective stuff and SMART goals and things like that, and all those are really cool. But it didn't really get to what I was trying to do. So I started to develop something that eventually became what I'd call the Purpose Playbook. It's a practice, not a resolution, so I can do it at any time. This is important, for example, in January of 2020, how long would my New Year's resolutions have lasted, right? But I'm able to take this and adapt to a new situation. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of this. The 4 steps basically are the following. And normally I do this over a weekend or over a long week and have a little bit of tea or my favorite beverage or whatever. Sometimes I've done this with other people. It's enabled to keep us accountable. If we had more time, I might say turn to a partner and do this together. But we don't have time today. But if you have a piece of paper, if you're curious, you might be able to follow along real quick, because this is an exercise that you can use personally, but you can also use it with a team. The first thing I do is review my calendar over the last year. Why? I don't remember what happened last January. Do you? It's kind of amazing to see all the things that you've done, the meetings, the milestones, the deliverables that you've seen, whether it's on a team or personal. It's real informative. And so I just note some of those down month by month. The second thing I do is go to my photos. These are the things that capture all the things that don't happen in meetings. The great hike, the birthday party, the great dinner. And I do the same thing. I note those. I try and see what has happened. I usually get some fun out of it. But the key thing I'm doing is I'm looking for 4 things. What made me feel good? Not just think good, feel good. What made me feel proud? What drained me? And when was I activated? When did I feel a lot of energy? And this gets it out of kind of your accomplishments list. I mean, I'm sure we all have a lot of accomplishments, but sometimes accomplishments can feel draining. And that's important to note. Because what I'm trying to figure out is a pattern. Are there any patterns that have emerged over the last year that are important to kind of me understanding my purpose? Then I kind of widen the aperture. I look back maybe forward a year, back a year, 2 years. What were my top 5 moments? Again, this is not my accomplishments, but what were my top 5 moments? It could be anything. But what I'm looking for is what's the energy and what is the feeling that makes me think, some of this actually links to the patterns I just figured out over my year review. Generally what happens, and I sometimes put it away and for a day or two, I take this and I draft a purpose statement. The key thing here is less than 5 words, use verbs, make it memorable. Now, for you, it might be, it's a lyric to a song. It could be a quote by somebody else that's really motivating. It could be a drawing. People learn, and it's almost internal marketing for you. So I can't tell you what it's going to show up as, but it's got to be memorable to you. Why does it got to be five words? Well, do you remember things that are, you won't remember this entire speech, right? But you can remember 5 words. So here is mine for 2021, and it relates to here. Highest Arena was a reflection of, I've been trying to do a little bit of writing. I had a little column in Forbes, and I had a little of this, and I did a little speech here. But every time I did it, I had fun, I learned things, and somebody would say, hey, you want to do this? Or you want to go to this meeting or this? And I started to be like, wow, the pattern is when I put more stuff out, I get invited to new conversations, and those conversations are fun. So arena is a reference to the man in the arena. It should be updated, but the Roosevelt speech. And the highest room refers to actually a Mahalia Jackson song, In the Upper Room. And those two things were memorable for me, so I put it together, highest arena. That's it. By the way, you'll notice that I violated the rule of no verbs, but that was 2021. I'm doing better now. But here's the kicker, the daily practice. This is the difference between resolutions and practices. Every day, I write 3 things I'm grateful for. I rewrite my purpose statement or statements every day. Yes, I'm repeating the same purpose statement every day. And then what did I do that's related to that purpose? It could be minor, it could be tiny, it doesn't matter. Is there anything I did that was connected to that purpose? This practice is what transformed the sort of purpose playbook into something really useful, because it became decision infrastructure. I knew what my purpose was. I knew the thing that was motivating me. And so when I came to a decision I needed to make, a lot of times, particularly 2 good options, I'd go back to this and say, what is more in line with my purpose? The last time I presented this, a guy came up to me afterwards and said, have you done this with teams? Because I would love to do this with my team. I haven't gotten back his feedback yet. But it occurred to me that this is something that you could do personally, you could do with your team. It'd be a really interesting exercise to really learn what people are motivated by, what their purpose is, and where it can align, and where it might be misaligned, and how can we repair that and figure that out. We've done versions of this with our clients. Not to this extent, not as personal, but we, as part of our demo and part of our sprint, every once in a while make sure to say, are we aligned on the purpose of what we're doing? Are we still doing the same thing together? Context might change. It's okay if it has. We just need to make sure that we have that conversation. So I've talked about 3 elements of infrastructure that will propel technology in a human-centered justice way. First, being human-centered, because it reduces the blind spots. And there's techniques to make sure that we reduce those blind spots and are able to move forward without causing undue harm. Second, the concept of imaginal cells. Breaking down the silos means being able to connect with other parts of a system. Recognize that you're in a system, and then be able to connect with those other parts. And finally, purpose. Why are we doing what we're doing? How can we animate more of our actions with a sense of purpose? All these pieces are your infrastructure so that you can share it, so it can be scaled, and so it can be sustained. I'll close with this. Move to Edge, Declare It Center is the name of the book. It's the purpose of our company. And these are the quotes that inspired the name of the book. And I'm showing this. One was by Dave Hickey talking about Andy Warhol. The second is Toni Morrison after her Nobel speech. And both have the same kind of energy. But doing things that are different is like moving to the edge. I can tell you that doing human-centered development and doing agile development back in 2013 with Health.gov was the edge. There was no agile development in any real way happening in the US government. Procurement rules forbade a lot of that. Cloud was not part of government work. 10 years later, the world is now revolved around these new concepts and practices. And if we can get the largest institution in the world, the DoD, to adopt agile practices, then maybe there's something to this, being able to center on human-centered design, development, and in your case, access to justice. So it's evident that you all have the commitment, the passion, and the talent to move others to the edge, especially if you get a little help and build yourself some infrastructure so it's not as much toil. And I'm really grateful that you all are doing that because it enables all of us to declare justice as the center. Thank you very much. We have time for questions, which I really welcome and I get excited by because I usually learn something that I haven't thought of before. So please ask away.
Hi, I'm wondering, what was your purpose statement for 2022 with the action verbs?
Yeah, there were two. Practice, the book is spiritual practice was the way it kind of came out. And it was based off of the experience that many folks have had where you don't write a book, you survive a book. Because just the notion of sort of, is anybody going to read this? And did I get anything wrong? And I would have changed this. It's part of this practice of saying, I'm going to put something out and it's going to be okay. It's going to be part of what the world interacts with. And if there's something that's needs to be changed, I get to learn something different. And that's a really important practice for me. It's like gets away from the perfectionism, just get it out there and get it in the world and see what happens. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you talk just a little bit more about the overwhelm and how to kind of even get started on these things when it feels like with our funding, we're very, scattering day to day, just trying to get things done and through, let alone get it to a real high level. Where those procedures are operating properly.
So just make sure I understand the question, that how do we get through that initial feeling of overwhelm? Yeah, okay. I had a couple other slides and I took them out that really kind of document a little bit, but I'll try and summarize them. It feels overwhelming, so it's shrinking the problems that are within your space. So some problems are not things that you can solve, right? Other people can solve them. It is a problem, do we actually understand the problem? So how can we ask questions to make sure that we really are understanding what the problem is? Are there different perspectives on that problem? So this is where bringing in different people from different agencies or different professions or different perspectives start to break down the problem. It's like, it's a problem for these people, but it's not a problem for this person. Now you've shrunk the space that problem occupies. And I think last is, kind of thinking about what is the feasibility of solving that. There's some problems that, it's going to take 5 years to do that. Well, we can't wait 5 years. And then there's impact on the other access. And the sweet spot is something that is feasible. We can do this within some amount of time with high impact. And it's really interesting when you start to sort these things out and you get the list of the things that you try and solve, and then you put that rubric on top of it, the problem space really shrinks. And so that's a tactic that we've used to kind of go and work with our clients on that, actually, to kind of narrow that problem space and then be able to make progress going forward. I think the last thing I close with is there's a real temptation, I certainly have it, of like wanting to make the big thing and do the important thing and do it right now. Sometimes the most important thing is one small step, one little change. Figure out how that happens, bring people along, measure the impact, and then start with the next one. Thanks for the question, both of them. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. In the practices section, I found myself really intrigued by the overlap between kind of personal reflections and professional. It seemed, a lot of talk lately about work-life balance is really separating the personal and the professional, and I'm intrigued by the idea of having your purpose statement maybe support both.
I love that question. Two things I'm thinking of at the moment. I tend to not use work-life balance for the exact reason you talked about. It's life. We work during part of it. And the pandemic with, I was always like, I'm going to do one more thing at 4:45, and then it'd be 7 o'clock. And I had no idea what happened at that time. It happened every day until we realized that it was going on. So I think so that's the first thing. So I do think that thinking about it as a whole is really, really important. The second thing I'm thinking about in terms of your question is that we bring our whole selves to work, right? Including having space for, hey, I had a bad day, I had something terrible happen at home or whatever. And for us, having employees that are thriving, sustainably thriving, means we send people home, right? We have a thing called surge time. So if someone is really going hard for a week or so, doing like, a 70-hour week or an 80-hour week, we say, look, you got to put time on the calendar to take time off. And it's called surge time. There's like a spot in the HR form for that, in timekeeping form for that, because our purpose is to have people be able to continue to do great work. So if we exhaust them, it doesn't serve our purpose and it doesn't serve theirs either. So that's like one manifestation of how this comes to be. But I think it's a really important one. I think it does animate kind of, am I in the right position? Am I using the core strengths that I have? Am I using the core strengths I have often enough? It starts to lead to some really interesting insights. And so if you can compare that with a team, you might learn something, particularly a new skill that somebody had that they've been dying to use, but no one ever asked them. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool.
Hi, thank you. You talked about bringing together folks that are working on the back end and on the front end. And I wonder if you could talk about also leadership in bringing in people who are doing the work and carrying out the work on a day-to-day basis, but also when maybe people have a ton of meetings and can get burnt out with having frequent meetings.
Right, okay. So there's two questions. One is sort of how does leadership bring in input from other parts of the organization? And the second one is in how do you deal with too many meetings? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll answer the second one first. Meeting hygiene. Do most of your meetings have titles that you know exactly what the meeting's for? Does it have notes that say, here's what the meeting is supposed to do, decisions that are going to be made, who's going to be at the meeting, things like that? Mine don't all the time. But I know when it does, that meeting hygiene makes the meeting much more effective, including saying, do we need to have a meeting? No, we don't. The second thing we do, we have what's called stand-ups. Anybody familiar with stand-ups, like really short meetings? Okay, so stand-ups are basically for a team. They get together daily, 15 minutes. And the original thing is you don't sit down, you actually stand up. So it's like kind of reinforcing that this is temporary. Doesn't work so well on Zoom, but that's okay. But the goal is like, what am I doing? What am I blocked on? No, what am I doing? What am I blocked on? Do I need any help? You can add, are there things we owe? And everybody goes in the room and just says that. It's amazingly effective as a short meeting to know what's going on. And it's not a status update, it's just what am I working on and am I blocked? And then you disperse. Things like that, having better quality meetings, tend to reduce the number of meetings you happen to have. That's been our experience. So that's question number 2. The first question, how do you have leadership bring in different perspectives? Does anybody know heard of something called the retrospective, doing retros? Okay, a couple. So briefly, retros are a meeting, a tactic that you have on a regular basis, let's say every month or every 6 weeks, and definitely at the end of a project. And it's real simple. It's an opportunity for blameless learning. So the first part of it is everybody independently writes down. And by the way, to address your question, leadership as well as people who are working directly on the project are in the meeting. So be really clear. Everybody writes down what went well, independently, because you don't want the confirmation bias. And then they submit that, and everybody reads out everything that everybody wrote. So that's about 15 minutes total. If there's anything that comes out of that great list that says, hey, we should do more of that, an action item is assigned. Boom. Then you spend a little more time saying, what went wrong? What could have been better? Again, write it down independently, read them out. Sorry, forgot a step. You vote on you group them, and you vote on which cluster of things that you want to talk about. Because then the conversation becomes, oh, I thought it was this, but you thought it was that. No blame. It's like, okay, how do we fix that? It's a communication problem. Okay, how do we make sure to communicate better? Those meetings are incredible ability for people who are closest to the work in a blameless way and in an anonymous way, if it's necessary, to talk about the things that went well and didn't go well. We used to do it for our entire company. What's going wrong, what's good at the company, what's bad. It worked till about 50 people and then it just broke. There's too many folks. But we do this with all of our teams and we do it with our client teams. It is really interesting to include the clients in that process because they are coming at it from a very different perspective. And usually there's something that we all learn that we're like, oh, I wish we knew that ahead of time. But we do the best we can. That's why you have it on a consistent basis. Did that answer your question?
Hi, thank
Hi.
you so much for this. I have a question. I've been dwelling on your complicated versus complex. And I was like, oh dear, I'm definitely thinking complicated. It's linear, it's nice, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's like a nice comfort food.
Yeah.
But how do you move, like, especially when you're part of a team or you're leading a team, move people from the way you're used to thinking about doing things, which for me is complicated, towards more of a complex mindset?
Yeah. Great question. So first, there are problems that are complicated. Let's be clear, not everything's complex. There are things that are very linear, well understood. I'd argue that our most challenging problems and challenges are complex, and they don't have one right answer. Climate change, for example, perfect example of that. So how do you move towards thinking about a more complex way? We've all been trained to have the right answer since grade school. Raise your hand who has the right answer. We weren't trained to have the right question. So how do you start asking questions? How do you start saying, how do we know this thing is linear? How do we know this is the outcome we want? How do we know this is what our users and our customers are actually thinking? Well, I don't know. It's always been that way. Okay, so how long has the situation changed? Do you have any data? So it's really, I think the short answer is to start asking questions, and there are methods for how to do that and ways to sort of ask really, really good questions that move the ball forward. But I'd say that's where I would start with.
All right, just last two questions.
Testing. Quick questions. So you mentioned development and need to have all the people at the table to actually get all the information for the product. How often are you doing this testing as well, and do you kind of identify exactly what you want to test when you're actually meeting with the users and the operators, those various people who need to be at the table?
Right, good question. How often are we getting all the people around the table and doing that testing? If I was the designer, it's never enough. If I'm a client, it's too much. So it's really a negotiation between the two. What we try and do is two tactics. One, we try and make sure, at least at the beginning of the project and at major milestones, that we are testing the project or the process with somebody who is using the system. That is critical. We actually have said no to clients because they didn't feel like that was necessary or useful. And then with that kind of iteration, we do have important input at crucial times. The second part, give me the second part of your question. Oh, time, yeah. It sort of varies depending on the type of project and the milestone. I think ideally, again, a designer would do it every week. But I think the more realistic one is thinking about what are crucial decision points in a process where going left or going right really defines the trajectory of the project. I can't tell you that necessarily for your project, but I think about where are these decision points and where are these milestones where we need to make and need to know that we have gotten as good information as we can, because the risk of doing it wrong becomes higher if we choose the wrong thing. That might be the way I'd start to think about it.
Hi.
Thanks.
Hello?
Hello.
Sure. Stand up. Hi.
Hey.
So do you have any specific tactics from a project management standpoint when working with government agencies? Like how you approach the project or any tactics and strategies that you use specifically with government agencies on projects?
Can you say that first part of your question again? I didn't hear the first part.
From a project management standpoint.
Project management standpoint?
When you're working with government agencies, do you have any specific tactics or strategies you use to sort of maybe get through some of the bureaucratic hurdles or other?
So there's lots of different ones. It's hard to kind of nail them down, but I think the way I would approach it, if I'm thinking about it, going into that kind of a government agency, is understanding what the constraints are, right? There's particular constraints that may not make any sense whatsoever, but you better know what they are. HIPAA requirements, for example, or different kind of compliance regimes. Probably more in your case, you have like local jurisdictions, and jurisdiction A is different than jurisdiction B, and they're right next to each other, but you got to know what those constraints are they're working with. So that is the first one. I think the second one is, what are the resources and access points that you have? So do you have access to data? Do you have access to systems? Do you have access to users? Do you have access to the operators of the system? And so from a project management standpoint, third, who are the stakeholders? Like the major decision makers, whether they're in charge of the budget. So I'm starting to do this map of the resources of the projects that are available and the constraints that are governing the decisions that need to be made. So when I think about those types of frameworks, and that's what I'm trying to get to, and then it's just asking a lot of questions. Like, what are the things that you're trying to do? I think the subtlety that I would say is we've been far more successful. One of our values is called working shoulder to shoulder. And it's one thing to have a phone call, one thing to get a piece of paper that says, here are the requirements. It's another thing to go to their office and sit down with them and just say, can you just show me how you do what you do? And you're just observing. And you're not making any judgments, you're just observing. And what that does is give you the context in which somebody is operating. Is it a busy office? Is it a quiet office? Is it private? Is it public? That can make a huge difference. And so now you're getting into the subtlety of how it is that people are reacting to the situations that they're in, and that can fuel some of the understanding of what you can do and what you can't do. And frankly, I think it builds a lot of trust. Most people don't get asked to show what they do, and when you do, they're delighted to tell you. And what I found basically in doing some of the research, and doing research on these types of things, is they give me the answer. They don't even know they're giving me the answer. They're just saying, here's what I'm doing, and here's where I'm blocked, and here's what I want to accomplish. Not even what do you need, but just like, here's what I do. And that often really can fuel a lot of advancement while building trust with your partners across the board. Thanks for the question. Okay. Hey, thank you again. I just want to put on one more slide, which is this is how you can reach me. Please do, if you have thoughts and questions, because I get curious about like, what is everybody thinking? And I learned some things as well. So I really appreciate you inviting me and allowing me to spend time with you. Thank you very, very much.